presentation and follow along with me as we talk about healing my implicit bias. Really an important topic for us to deal with today. So I want to begin by talking about the power of our minds and how we are influenced by both conscious and unconscious influences. So let's begin with a little exercise. Which is bigger, the table on the left or the table on the right? I'm going to suggest to you, and I'm going to prove to you, that those two tables are exactly the same size. So here, you see, we took that cover from on one table, and I'm going to move it over, and I'll turn it, and it sits perfectly on the other one. That is called the Shepard's tabletop illusion. It's a very familiar illusion in the field of psychology. And the tabletops look like they're different sizes because in one view, you look at the end of the table, and the other, you are having a side view. The retinas of our eyes see the tables as identical. But when our eyes transmit the image to the brain, our brain automatically converts the 2D image into a 3D image and gives depth to the picture, and our unconscious magnifies the vertical dimension. Importantly, there is an unconscious inference that automatically works on this image. And this illusion dramatically illustrates that much of the work of our minds is done automatically, unconsciously, without any intent. These processes are so powerful that even though I have shown you and demonstrated that the two tabletops are identical, if I go back to them as you look at them now, they really still do not look as if they are the same. And I'm dealing with the important point, or illustrating the important point, that there are conscious processes that affect us, and there are unconscious processes that affect us. And many experts suggest, and this is not a rigid number, that as much as maybe 90% of what our behavior and our thoughts are driven by the subconscious. And you can see the beliefs, the emotions, the habits, the values, the protective reactions are all driven by unconscious processes. And the picture is of an iceberg where a lot of the iceberg is beneath the surface. That is true for a lot of human behavior. This book, Blind Spot, is written by two experts in the field of implicit bias, Professor Banerjee at Harvard University and Professor Anthony Greenwald, who developed the implicit association test. And what their work shows, and this book illustrates, is that when one holds a negative stereotype about a group, and you meet someone who fits the stereotype, you will treat that person differently. That is, you will discriminate against them. It's automatic, it's unconscious. You are doing it, you're not even aware that you're doing it. It occurs even among persons who are not prejudiced. Implicit biases, then, are normal, natural, subtle, and often subconscious processes that occur. They are universal. All humans have them. I like to tell my students that I think of myself as a prejudiced person. And I tell them I think of myself as a prejudiced person because I would like to think of myself as a normal human being. And if you are a normal human being, you are probably prejudiced. I didn't say you're racially prejudiced because this is not about race. It's about how all of us process the complex cognitive information that is embedded in our minds that we face every day. We process all of the stimuli we face by putting things into categories. And every society, every culture, every community has in-groups and out-groups. groups that are viewed positively and groups that are viewed negatively. And what the research shows, when you meet someone who belongs to a group that you view negatively, you note subconsciously the fact that they belong to a negative group, and there is a negative appraisal and negative interactions with them, which can include discriminating against that person without your own conscious awareness. These implicit biases, or unconscious discrimination, as it's sometimes called, develops naturally through routine social interactions and exposure to the lessons our culture teaches us. Where we differ is where were we raised and what were the messages that we received from our culture. They guide our expectations and interactions with others. They can become harmful when assumptions and generalizations about a group affect our interactions with an individual. Even the most well-meaning individual can harbor deep-seated biases. So you're not a bad person because you have them. You're just normal. And however, implicit biases are not the only type of discrimination. We're going to talk about explicit discrimination as well. I want us to go through a little exercise that psychologists have developed. Here's an exercise where your task is to name the color that you see that is presented to you. Remember, it's the color, not the words. It is very hard as your brain wants to read the word itself instead of stating the color. And I want to see how well each of you can do with it. So here is the test. This is straightforward. It begins easy. It gets more difficult as we move along. So let's look at the test. That's red, blue, green, yellow. The second line, yellow, red, read with me, blue, red. You know, easy, blue, yellow, red, green was the third line. Let's look at the first row now. Now we have the word and the color. So it's a little more difficult, but it's red, they match, red, blue, green, yellow, right? Second row, yellow, green, blue, red. Third row, green, red, yellow, blue. Now it gets interesting. I want you to read and read as quickly as you can. Green, yellow, red, blue. Are you with me? Green, blue, red, yellow. Third row, yellow, blue, red, green. Did you notice something? This is called the Stroop test. It demonstrates that our brains work fast when the concepts match, but our brains slow down when the concepts do not match. When the color and the word are not saying the same thing, we get a little confused. So what it illustrates is how fast our brains are when concepts match. They are stereotype consistent. And how slow our brains are when concepts do not match, when they are stereotype inconsistent. Those implicit biases exist in everyday life. People, including us, routinely make assumptions and act on them based on deeply embedded stereotypes that we have. I'm going to show you a video that illustrates this very, very powerfully. It reflects the work of an undercover journalist and what he is able to document for us.
You see this and you wonder, did he lose his keys or is he blatantly stealing that bike? In broad daylight, he hammers and then saws on the chain. When that doesn't work, he pulls out an industrial-sized bolt cutter. And when he's asked, he fesses up.
You lost the lock?
No, not exactly.
But he's not a real thief. Justin Kelly is an actor, and our hidden cameras are rolling.
What happened?
Nothing. I can't get through the lock. I mean, I know this is weird, but you wouldn't happen to know whose bike this is, would you?
No.
All right, good. Thank you.
It was odd that somebody had all that equipment.
But you didn't do anything.
No.
That's true.
That's the bottom line.
Lots of people stop and stare. A few even question the actor.
I guess I have to ask, is that your bike?
I guess technically no.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Good luck.
In over an hour, about 100 people passed by. Only George and Arlene try to stop him. Some tell us they plan to call the police later. Others say they're scared. Keep moving. This woman and her friends give our thief the benefit of the doubt. When we ask why, Bisa Washington tells us first impressions matter.
I remember thinking young white men don't usually carry burglar tools.
So we all make
That-
assumptions, huh?
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe he works for the park.
We replace our white thief with this young man, Matlock. Remember, both actors dress in a similar way and are about the same age.
Is that your bike?
Nah.
Then what are you cutting the chain for?
Right away. Right away, somebody yelled. Wow.
Within seconds, another person confronts our thief.
Is that your bike?
Technically, it's not, but it's gonna be mine.
More people converge.
Is that on the cell phone? You call the police. He's like stealing somebody's bike.
Are you taking that bike? That's your bike?
No, it's not, sir.
Oh, why are you doing that?
Is this any of y'all bikes? Is this your bike?
It's not, it belongs.
No, but whoever's it
It
is,
belongs to someone.
To who?
well, not to you.
And sure enough, one man whips out a cell phone to call 911.
Yeah, there's someone taking a bike here.
Our actor triggers more reaction. Some people are even snapping pictures for evidence.
I got you. I got you.
Guy's stealing the bike. Whose bike's over here?
Once everyone moves away, we reset our cameras. And within minutes, another outraged man is yelling.
Are you trying to steal that bike?
Excuse me, sir, but the bike's been here for days. Like, no one's gonna take it.
Well, that's not your bike then.
Yeah.
You can't just come in and take something from somebody.
Excuse me, sir. I'm not...
Okay, I'll just take your tools away then. This yours, sir?
Please, sir, don't touch my stuff, sir. Please, sir, do not touch my
Well,
stuff.
you're touching
please.
somebody else's stuff.
Yeah, all right, but this has been here. Like, who's gonna take it?
Well, that doesn't make it your property.
Technically, it does.
No, it doesn't technically. It's not yours to take.
All right, sir.
When we bring out our cameras, David Robb wants us to go after the thief.
That kid in the red shirt.
He's hacking away at a bike
has
that's
been
not
here
his.
for days, and he has a right to take it and steal it. And he's come here.
She may not look like your average bike thief, but actress Ashley Carpenter makes sure anyone who asks knows she's up to no good.
Need a hand?
You don't know who this is, do you?
Whose bike it is?
Yeah.
With a little help from Ed Fitzsimmons, the bike chain easily falls away.
Drop everywhere. Oh my goodness, what a strong man you are.
And he isn't the only man who stops in his tracks. What's this guy thinking?
You know, you pull up, you don't know if she lost her key, if she's trying to actually take the bike, but then again, she's a girl. And would you ever see a girl doing that?
Steal?
You never know. Most of the times, it's a guy going to do something like that.
Reginald pedals right past his appalled wife, straight to our actress, asking her if she needs a hand.
Okay, I'll eventually get it.
I did some time in Norway. I can steal this.
Oh, you can steal it? Maybe you can help me steal it.
All right. So you saw that the reaction to the same behavior was different depending on who did it, right? This happens in real life. Here is a study. It's a classic study. There are many studies like this, hundreds of studies that have been done like this. 2 black men and 2 white men, young, well-groomed, well-spoken, college-educated. They had identical resumes. They applied for 350 advertised entry-level jobs in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but this has been repeated in multiple cities across the United States. This is called an audit study. Everything is identical. The only thing that varies is the race of the person applying. They threw a wrinkle into this audit study. One of the black males and one of the white males said he was out on parole and he'd served an 18-month prison sentence for cocaine possession. What the study found was if you said no or yes, you had a criminal record, let's focus on the yes, you were less likely to get a call back, this is among the white males, than if you had a clean record. Among the Black males, you were less likely to get a call back as well if you, yes, had a criminal record than if your record was clean. But do you see what we see here? It was easier for a white male with a criminal record to get a call back for a job than a Black male whose record was clean. The resumes were identical. And that is an example of how implicit biases play out in real life. And it's not just in employment. There's evidence that the same processes occur in medical care. This was a classic study done back in the 1990s, where a researcher went to a medical conference, internal medicine conference, and had a group of physicians, over 720, so that's hundreds of physicians, look at a patient, review a video of a patient. What the physicians didn't know was all the patients were actors. All of them claimed to be the same age, claimed to have the same job, claimed to live in the same neighborhood. They were even trained to have the same facial expressions and to describe the symptoms. The only thing that was different is that some were Black and some were white. Some were male and some were female. And what the study found was that if you were Black, you were less likely, given your symptoms, to get the appropriate medical diagnosis and treatment. And that was also true if you were female, with Black women having the most negative impact because they suffered from the stereotype of being female and the stereotype of being Black. This is an influential report published in 2003 by the National Academy of Medicine, the highest medical scientific authority in the United States. And they published this report in response to a request from the United States Congress, which had asked them, did what happened at a medical conference with fake patients actually happen when patients go into healthcare context in the United States? I served on the committee that produced this report. We reviewed the evidence. We don't initiate a study. We review the scientific evidence and try to come to a conclusion. And we identified more than 180 studies that had addressed the question, and not in every single study, but in over 80% of the studies, it was found across virtually every medical procedure that Black people and other populations of color received poorer quality care than whites did. A stunning finding. This is the press conference. This is from the Washington Post. And I was speaking, one of the four members of the committee. The committee actually had 13 members, but 4 of us were selected to speak at a national press conference. It was the evening news in the United States that day. A stunning finding. I just want to give you one example. Dr. Todd was an emergency room physician at UCLA Medical Center in California. And he asked a simple question. When a patient comes to the UCLA emergency department with a long bone fracture, that's medical speak for a broken bone in the arm or legs, does the patient's ethnicity determine whether the patient gets pain medication or not? And you see 55% of all Hispanic patients treated with a broken bone in the arm or leg over the past year did not get pain medication, compared to 26% of whites. And when he statistically studied what other factors were, the single most important factor of not getting pain medication was the patient was Hispanic. Dr. Todd moved from UCLA to Emory University in Atlanta, repeated the same study at 3 large emergency rooms in Atlanta, found exactly the same thing, looking at Black and white patients. A Black person with a broken bone in the arm or leg goes into the emergency room, less likely to get pain medication than a white patient. How do we make sense of this? How is it possible that well-meaning, principled, highly educated health professionals working in the usual circumstances nonetheless can create a pattern of care that appears to be discriminatory? Well, one of the things we know from the scientific research is that there are certain factors that enhance the likelihood of implicit biases occurring. when you're working under time pressure, when you need to make quick judgments, when there's a lot of cognitive information to process, when the tasks are complex, also when the emotions of being tired or anxious are present. And many of these factors characterize a typical medical encounter. Importantly, the research shows, I want you to do something for me, and it's going to illustrate what the research shows. Could everyone blink your eye for me? Just blink your eye, okay? It takes, on average, about 300 to 400 milliseconds. A millisecond is 1,000th of a second to blink your eye. But when you meet someone, in 1/3 of the time it takes to blink your eye, you make a judgment about that person and you will treat them based on what's deeply embedded in your subconscious. And you say, who, me? And I say, yes, you. You say, couldn't be? It's you. The Bible warns us, let him or her who thinks you stand take heed lest you fall. Or Jeremiah 17:9 tells us the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? These are processes that affect us all. There are ways in which, if you want to dig more deeply into this, the implicit.harvard.edu/implicit website provides the implicit association test, where millions of people from around the world have gone to that site and taken their tests and identified the implicit biases. But I want to let you know that these biases exist. Let me tell you about a finding from the Implicit Association website of the millions of people who've taken the test. If they look at persons from the United States, at least 70% of all Americans have an implicit bias against Blacks. Over between 70 and 80% of every racial group studied, every profession, doctors, lawyers, teachers, policemen, doesn't matter, 70 to 80%, everyone falls within that range. There's only one exception, and that's among Black people. And even among Black people, it's about 1 in 3 Black people have an implicit bias, negative bias against Blacks. You see, it's not about your race. It's about what's in your mind. And these are processes that occur. These negative stereotypes trigger racial discrimination. And I just want to illustrate just how profound these negative stereotypes are. Here's a study done in 1990. National data for the United States, respected social science survey. 44% of whites believe that Blacks are lazy, 56% that Blacks prefer to live off welfare, 51% Blacks are prone to violence, 29% Blacks are intelligent. In fact, this is how whites viewed Blacks compared to how whites viewed themselves. So for example, 56% of whites believe that Blacks prefer to live off welfare, where only 4% of whites believe that whites prefer to live off welfare. So you see the preponderance of a negative view. Importantly, here is a study from 2013. Remember, that was 1990 data. You said how things have changed. Remember what we saw back here, that 51% of whites believe that Blacks are prone to violence in 1990. Here is 2013% of white adults viewing group as prone to violence. 52% of whites in 2013 believe that Blacks are prone to violence. And you can see then 43% Hispanics, 29% Native Americans, and Arab Americans, 22% believe that whites are prone to violence. So you see the persistence of these patterns even over time. And you say, well, where do these negative stereotypes come from? They are deeply embedded in our culture. I want to illustrate that with another study, research done by a group of scientists who put in one database American culture, about 10 million words. The books, newspapers, magazine articles that the average college-educated person would read over their lifetime. What's brilliant about this, if you put a culture into a database, you can ask the database, when the word Black appears in American culture, what word most commonly co-occurs with it? What adjective goes with it? The most common adjective is poor, then violent, then religious, then lazy, then cheerful, then dangerous. When white occurs, wealthy, progressive, conventional, stubborn, successful, educated. When female occurs, distant, warm, gentle, passive. Male, dominant, leader, logical, strong. So if you were raised in American society, those are associations you have seen on television, in literature, in the newspapers. These are associations that have been a part, deeply embedded in your subconscious because of the society in which you were raised. So here are the 10 most common stereotypes in this study in American culture. The larger the number, it means the more closely tied those associations are. And you see the predominance of negative stereotypes among Blacks, some negative stereotypes among whites as well, but you see the numbers are larger, which means they're more closely tied together. This helps to make sense of some of the things we are struggling with in the United States, the overreaction of many police officers to unarmed Blacks. But if you keep in mind that deeply embedded in the subconscious is that Blacks are violent and dangerous, then it is not a surprise that in a split second, when you have to make quick judgments, police officers overreact. So we're not necessarily dealing with a bad cop. We are simply dealing with a normal American who is acting on what is deeply embedded in his subconscious based on the society he or she was raised in. I want to give you another example of implicit bias and interactions in education, just to illustrate the challenges that we're talking about.
Let's look at how to measure bias in ourselves and in others. Here's Dolly Chuk from NYU.
We sent emails to real professors in real universities.
They contacted over 6,500 professors at random from 260 American universities.
We sent them an email that looked like it came from a real person asking for a meeting to learn more about the PhD program in that university. But we randomly assigned whether the fictional person sending that email had a name that sounded male or female and sounded white, Chinese, Hispanic, Indian, or Black. What we found that is if you were a white male, you were far more likely to receive a response back than if you were in all those other categories put together as a group.
Some of this could be explicit racism, but it's far more likely that in many cases, these professors are just busy. They can't respond to every email they get, so they kind of let their subconscious decide for them. And that's where their biases come through. Research shows that our racial biases are often more about who we choose to help than who we don't. And we tend to help people who are similar to us. But you aren't 6,500 randomly selected professors. So how can you figure out where you might be making similar unconscious choices? First, there's a well-known test online you can take that can help show you biases you hold. Or
just do an audit. Whatever data you have, whether it's formal data in a computer or whether it's just data that's sort of anecdotal, look at the data. For example, I met this fantastic executive in Silicon Valley. He takes great pride in being someone who actively tries to achieve gender balance on his teams, knowing that Silicon Valley and tech are skewed heavily male.
So he looked at his professional social network, his Twitter, his LinkedIn.
He found his network was far more skewed male than he expected. So there's a place where he could actively work to shift that, and that's what he's been doing since then.
So this is not a scientifically exact self-audit, but it can still be useful, and you can audit anything. So maybe start by taking that online test for bias. Maybe check out whose emails you're replying to. But you can also audit yourself for implicit bias by asking a friend to observe you in the real world. If you're a teacher, have people look at who you call on most in class, whatever your interactions are.
One practical thing that people should do is take stock of their friends. It would be very useful for people to actually make lists of people with whom they spend time.
Look for patterns. That's the audit. That's the assessment we can all do.
Okay, just you're seeing examples of implicit bias, and now we want to get to the heart of the matter. What can we do to reduce implicit bias? One option is to say, we'll suppress it, just don't do it. The research actually suggests that this is very difficult to do. Studies of instructions to stop stereotyping actually suggest for many people there's a rebound effect in which a stereotype later occurred at an even higher rate. Stereotype suppression can also lead to social distancing. You want to avoid the group or someone from the group. and it undermines the quality of the interaction that needs to be developed. Suppressing stereotypes also requires effort. This can deplete our cognitive resources and reduce our ability to really try to make correct decisions and to solve the problem. Remember, stereotypes, even negative racial stereotypes, are natural. So we need to recognize them and use strategies to counteract them rather than try to suppress them, because it really doesn't work. What else could we do? Well, one potential option is to use a medication to eliminate implicit bias. That can be done. A randomized, double-blind, parallel group, placebo-controlled design of a single oral dose of a beta blocker eliminated implicit bias in a group of physicians in the United Kingdom for over 2 hours. This is a really important study. It doesn't tell us the way. We cannot medicate the world's population for the rest of the life and everybody in the world. But it does tell us that implicit bias is a real process that's occurring in our brains that can be intervened on successfully with a pharmacologic agent. You see, in our society today, there are some leaders who say that implicit bias is fake news. It's not real. It's just people have made it up. No, it's not fake news. It's a real process in our brains that we can even use a chemical substance and intervene on it. The good news is there are a number of strategies that have been shown in scientific research to reduce implicit bias. Things like stereotype replacement, or counter-stereotype imaging, or individuation, or perspective taking, or increasing interracial contact. I'm going to explain them in a minute. I like to talk about a divine solution. Professor Patricia Devine from the University of Wisconsin shows that she can take a group of people, motivate them to be concerned about implicit bias, to increase their awareness of it, and to implement all of those strategies. And these were effective in producing substantial reductions in bias. And those reductions remain evident 3 months later. I want to illustrate this by talking about the real divine solution. Jesus used all of the strategies that science has discovered. Stereotype replacement is when you take a negative stereotypes and you turn it into a positive one. You see stereotype replacement with Jesus' encounter with the woman of Samaria. Jews didn't talk to Samaritans. Samaritan women were definitely unclean, would not have anything to do with them, yet Jesus elevated her, treated her with dignity and respect. You also see Jesus having women in Luke chapter 8 working alongside him in his ministry. That was a no-no. The rabbis thought a man was not supposed to even talk to a woman in the street, not even his own wife. But here Jesus was replacing the negative stereotype with positive images of women. And we see that with Jesus selecting women to announce the good news that he was risen from the dead. Jesus used stereotype replacement. Another strategy, counter-stereotype imaging. You see that in the story of the Good Samaritan. Counter-stereotype imaging, you think of all women are weak. Well, imagine what a strong woman looks like. Here Jesus took the Samaritan, a despised group, and made the Samaritan the hero of the story. And in that story gave his listeners the image of someone who did despise, who was doing something very positive. Counter-stereotype imaging. Individuation. We all process the complex cognitive information we face every day by social categorization, putting things into categories. Individuation says we resist that tendency and we pay attention to the specific, unique characteristics of each individual. And Jesus did that with every person every day that he met. He treated them as a child of God, not based on the negative social categories to which they might belong. Perspective perspective taken is walking in the shoes of another. And that's what we are told about Jesus. He was touched with the feelings of our infirmities. He walked in our shoes, and therefore he's able to support us. He pitched his tent beside ours. And another strategy for reducing implicit bias is increasing interracial contact. And we saw Jesus doing that by talking to Samaritans, by meeting with the Syrophoenician woman, by helping the Roman centurion. These were not people of his group, but Jesus had contact with them. So in the example of Jesus in the Gospels, we see all of the strategies to reduce implicit bias. What are the challenges we face? We face challenges because in America, we, people of different racial ethnic groups, do not live together. These are the levels of segregation. The level of 61 means that 61% of white people would have to change residence to have an even distribution of blacks and whites in the United States. And you can see what the numbers are: 49% for Latino white and 52% for Asian white. We do not socialize together. This is the percent of by race of social networks that are members of the same race. You can see 91% of whites, most of their close friends are also white, 83% of blacks. That's true. It's much better for Hispanics, where there's much more diversity. 64% of their friends are Latino. And then we do not worship together. Here is a study reported only 10%. This is not at the Adventist Church. All churches of U.S. congregations are integrated. 9% of whites say few or no blacks are in their religious services. 73% of blacks say their churches have few or no whites. This study is a little dated, but there hasn't been dramatic change over time. As many as 87% of Christian churches in the U.S. are made up of only white or only black members. We seem to be comfortable praising God with people who look like us. Our denominations are segregated. Of the U.S. 10 largest Christian denominations, 4 are predominantly white and 4 are predominantly black. Only Catholics and Southern Baptists have significant numbers of minorities. Historically, many U.S. churches divided into 2 separate denominations based on race. That happened a long time ago. So what I'm saying is most black and white Americans worship in separate but equal worlds, and neither side exhibits a sense of urgency to address the situation. And what's the consequence of this? Again, folks, I'm reporting the research. Studies reveal that persons who attend primarily white churches are more likely to exhibit racist behaviors and have negative stereotypes of blacks. People who attend integrated churches are more similar in their racial attitudes to non-attendees. That means they are less prejudiced, because religious people are more prejudiced than non-religious people. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Whites who attend segregated churches are more covertly and overtly racist than the other 2 groups. I'm just telling you what the research shows. Although there's a chicken and egg problem, we don't know if segregated churches lead to intolerance, or do prejudiced people seek out segregated churches. The jury is out on that. But what does the Bible tell us? 1 John 3:14, we know that we have passed from death into life because we love the brethren. Who are the brethren? All God's children, regardless of who they are or where they come from. He who does not love abides in death. What am I saying today? Christians can take a leadership role in calling on our leaders to rise to the demands of the gospel. The hour is too late for us to be playing church. The centrality of unity in our witnessing for Christ is not sufficiently appreciated even among Adventists. There's little motivation on the part of our church to address the issue. And I've talked about implicit bias, but we can't solve the problem if we also don't discuss explicit bias. So how is race and prejudice related? Early study published back in the 70s was entitled The Bias and the Pious. It found that more religious you were, the more likely you were to be prejudiced, and religious people were more prejudiced than non-religious people. The more frequently you attended church, the more racially prejudiced you were. The more orthodox your theology, the more prejudiced you were. So for example, if you believed in the inspiration of the Bible, you were more prejudiced. If you believed in the virgin birth of Mary, you were more prejudiced than those who didn't. Researchers found something interesting. Not all religious people were more prejudiced. It was only people who were extrinsically religious. For people who are extrinsically religious, their religion is utilitarian, it's rules-oriented, it's legalistic, it's driven by a desire to show their status and show that they are upright, as opposed to intrinsically religious people for whom religion is something personal, integrated into their worldview, and is a central motivating force in their life and affecting all aspects of their lives. And what the research found was that intrinsically religious people were less prejudiced. The problem is most Christians in the United States are extrinsically religious. More recent studies have looked at religion and intolerance. And what they find is that some types of religious beliefs and orientations lead to a certain rigidity in thinking, prejudice, and intolerance. Again, I'm just reporting the studies. Research documents that what is called a fundamentalist orientation, that's not a theological fundamentalism, but a psychological fundamentalism. A fundamentalist orientation psychologically is defined as a rigid, close-minded worldview in which the individual believes that he or she religious beliefs are absolutely correct and everybody else is wrong. That is predictive of higher levels of prejudice. What seems to be important, the research finds, is not the content of your religious beliefs, but the inflexibility in which you hold those beliefs. I believe that Adventists should remember that while it is important for us to study to show ourselves approved unto God and to have a resolute commitment to the truths of God's word, we must nevertheless remember that we are engaged in lifelong learning and spiritual growth. In fact, there are many resources deeply embedded in the Adventist psyche that could be drawn on to address the tendency to be intolerant. The first, we believe that truth is progressive. The path of the just is as a shining light that shines more and more unto the perfect day. We may have a statement of doctrine that does not contain error, but we don't have all the truth. Truth, God constantly is revealing more truth to us. Growing in grace, constantly learning and expanding our understanding is what the Christian journey is like. In fact, we believe in revival and reformation, as Testimonies to Ministers says. And revival is a renewal of the spiritual life, a quickening of the powers of the mind, a resurrection from spiritual death. What is reformation? Reorganization, a change in ideas and theories, habits, and practices. When Reformation comes, there's going to be a radical break with tradition. We will be doing things differently. Evangelical leader wrote a book about the 7 last words of the church, and we've never done it, never tried it that way before. And oftentimes in our churches, we are stuck in a rut because we are following tradition instead of thinking of how does God want us to grow and what is God calling us to do. Testimonies to Ministers, page 3. Spirit of Prophecy says those who think that they will never have to give up a cherished view, never have occasion to change an opinion, will be disappointed. As long as we hold to our own ideas and opinions with determined persistency, we cannot have the unity for which Christ prayed. God and heaven alone are infallible. We have many lessons to learn and many, many to unlearn, almost like we have twice as many lessons to unlearn as those we have to learn. John 17 shares God's vision for his children, that they may all be one. Why? That they may be all be one, so that the world may believe that you send me. Verse 23, so that the world may know that you send me. In other words, what will convince the world of the power of the cross to change human nature is the unity of his followers. Spirit of prophecy, if you missed it in John 17, says harmony and union existing among men of varied dispositions is the strongest witness that can be borne that God has sent his son into the world to save sinners. And it is our privilege to bear that witness. In fact, we need each other. Spirit of prophecy also says there's no person, no nation that is perfect in every habit or thought. One must learn of another. Therefore, God wants the different nationalities to mingle together, to be one in judgment, one in purpose. Then the union that there is in Christ will be exemplified. How we get that union? When we mingle together to be one in judgment and one in purpose. It can be some doctrinal unity while we are off in our different camps. What's the test of true Christianity? Jesus said, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. That alone is a lot, that he asking us to love one another, but he goes further. He says, love one another as I have loved you. And what's the sign? We are the witness to the world. By this shall all men know ye are my disciples, if you have love one for another. We need that love that Jesus is talking about. We need it in our lives. We need to ask the Holy Spirit to baptize us anew with power from on high, to transform us, take away the stony hearts out of our flesh, and give us a heart of flesh. Given our awareness of implicit bias, we need to ask God to live out his life within us, so we will see each child of humanity through heaven's eyes and make a difference, to make a difference in their lives as God is calling us to do. May God bless each one of us as we seek to do this work that he is calling us to do. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am here live. I'm looking at questions in the chat. We do not have much time, but I'm trying to see what questions we have that I can answer quickly in the time that we have. There's a question that says, what relations implicit biases have with actual violence and crimes? I'm not sure exactly what the questioner is asking. When we are talking about implicit bias, we are primarily talking about the ways in which people react, an individual reacts to someone else. And so it shapes our interaction in powerful ways, but I don't fully understand what the question is getting at. Another question is, what's the implication of implicit bias for SDA believers and churches? Implicit bias, the existence means that we could be treating people differently. And remember, implicit bias is not just about race. You may not have an anti-Black bias, for example, but I would ask you, what are your stereotypes about fat people, about gay people, about old people, about women? So these stereotypes, race is central in American society, but these stereotypes can apply to any social group. So what its implications for Adventists is that it can shape our social interactions with each other. It can shape how we relate to each other. It can shape how we treat each other. In the United States particularly, studies of implicit bias have focused on how implicit bias leads to differential treatment. That's a fancy word for discrimination. Another question, I'm trying to go through as many as quickly as I can because I know we don't have much time. As a Black individual, how are we supposed to manage this? Because in one way or the other, this impacts our feeling, emotions, and behavior. Remember, as a Black individual, you have implicit biases too. All people have implicit biases. The question is, what are the groups in which you have implicit biases towards? So all of us need to recognize that this is possible for us. The person who says, I treat everybody the same, I don't see any differences among people, I treat everyone the same, is the person, let him that thinketh he standeth, take heed lest he fall, take home that text and meditate upon it, because this is true of all human. If you are a normal human being, you have implicit biases against some group. So for all of us, we need to realize this could be me. That means we should be patient with each other and don't assume if someone treated us negatively that they hated us or they, deliberately did it, because some of this is occurring unconsciously. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So let's be patient with each other and let's like to learn from each other, and let's create opportunities where there are safe places where we can interact. But let's all realize this is possible. And I showed you some of the strategies that have been shown in research to work, and I see all of them in the ministry of Jesus. So let's ask Jesus every day to live out his life within us so that we don't get caught in this. Okay, someone said that police officers should be on the medication that reduces implicit bias. Another one, trying to scroll down and read questions. There are lots of comments. What if we change our language when it comes to race and speak of race in a singular rather than following the world in the belief that there's more than one race? This might sound simplistic, but it speaks to oneness, not only by creation, but by redemption too. That's an interesting idea. I think practically, I mean, race is so deeply embedded in our society. I don't think we're going to will eliminate it in any time soon. And race matters so profoundly because of how society responds. So I see where you're coming from, but I am not sure that would really literally solve the problem. Someone talked about Jesus talked to lepers. Yes, I didn't give every example. I just gave a few examples. The example of Christ is that of intercultural and interracial contact by Christ. I completely agree with you. That was the point I was trying to make. If I wasn't clear, please forgive me. Could you kindly share the presentation? I think I have agreed with Dr. Peter Landless that I would send, this is the third presentation I'm giving at this series, not all on implicit bias. I've dealt with stress and the comprehensive health ministries and COVID-19 and the vaccines and so forth. They'll be on the health ministries website. And I have promised Dr. Landless I will send them to him and they will be posted there. I think I probably have time for one last question. How can love overcome implicit bias when love is framed by implicit bias? I think all of us can overcome implicit bias by first of all recognizing that even though we don't intend it, that is possible for us. That's the key. The key is to recognize you're vulnerable. And then ask God to help you and think of some of the strategies that I've laid out that we saw Jesus practicing. All of these can help us. So there is good news. This is natural human tendency, but we saw in Jesus practicing all of the strategies that have been studied, and he is willing through the power of the Holy Spirit to help us rise above our normal human tendencies and treat every person we encounter as a child of God. That's the good news of salvation. That's the grace that is available to us. That's the power of the Holy Spirit that Jesus wants us to follow him and love each other just as he loved us. And that applies to every child of humanity we encounter every day. May God bless you as we continue along the Christian path, looking to Jesus for grace and strength so that he would live out his life within us. Thank you very much. I think my time is up, and I wish you God's blessings. Yes, I will send the slides so that they will be posted on the Health Ministries website of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. Thank you. God bless you.